Hello students, welcome to this lecture on the human body, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Describe the components of ecosystem, discuss about population and community, explain about centers of diversity and conservation of biodiversity, describe about environmental issues. Let us start with a brief introduction. An ecosystem is a place with living and non-living things. These things need or use each other. An example of a large ecosystem is a forest. Living things need non-living things to survive. Without food, water and air, living things die. Sunlight, shelter and soil are also important for living things. Living things meet their needs from living and non-living things in ecosystems. As the human population continues to grow, the natural environment is put under ever-increasing pressure. Losses of biological diversity and major environmental changes are occurring at an accelerating rate and as a direct result of human exploitation of resources. Growing public concern over issues such as degradation and destruction of coral reefs and tropical rainforests, greening of the Arctic and accelerated loss of Arctic sea ice, species extinctions and the impacts of global climate change make ecology, conservation and environmental sustainability some of the most relevant areas of science today. It is also essential to understand how ecology fits in the context of addressing key sustainable development challenges, where there is a need to reconcile economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainability. The need to find solution means that there is a growing demand for professional ecologists who will have a key role to play in protecting the environment for future generations. Biotic components. Producers. These are mainly producing food themselves. Example, green plants produce food by photosynthesis in the presence of sunlight from raw materials like water and carbon dioxide. They are known as photoautotropy. Auto equal to self, photo equal to light, trophy, food. There are some chemoautotrophy, which are a group of bacteria producing their food from oxidation of certain chemicals, example sulfur bacteria. Consumers. These organisms get their food by feeding on other organisms. They are of the following types. Herbivores, which feed on plants, example rabbit, insect. Carnivores, which feed on herbivores as secondary carnivores, example frog, small fish, or tertiary carnivores, example snake, big fish, which feed on other consumers. Omnivores, which feed on both plants and animals, example humans, rats, many birds. Detritivores, which feed on dead organisms, example earthworm, crab, and ants. Decomposer. These are microorganisms which break down organic matter into inorganic compounds, and in this process they derive their nutrition. They play a very important role in converting the essential nutrients from unavailable organic form to free inorganic form that is available for use by plants, example bacteria, fungi. Biotic components. Various physicochemical components of the ecosystem constitute the biotic structure. Physical components include sunlight, solar intensity, rainfall, temperature, wind speed and direction, water availability, soil texture, etc. Chemical components include major essential nutrients like C, N, P, K, H2, O2, S, etc. and micronutrients like Fe, Mo, Zn, Cu, etc. Salts and toxic substances like pesticides. These physicochemical factors of water, air and soil play an important role in ecosystem functioning. Every ecosystem performs the following important function. It has different food chains and food webs. Food chain is the sequence of eating and being eaten, example grass, grasshopper, frog, snake, hawk, phytoplanktons, water algae, to water fleas, to water fish to large fish tuna. These are known as grazing food chain, which starts with green plants and culminates with carnivores. Organic matter, example leaf-litter forests to fungi to bacteria. Food chains are generally found to be interlinked and interwoven as a network and known as food web. There are several options of eating and being eaten in a food web. Hence, these are more stable. There is unidirectional flow of energy in an ecosystem. It flows from sun and then after being captured by primary producer, green plants, flows through the food chain or food web following the laws of thermodynamics. At every successive step in the food chain, there is huge loss of about 90% of the energy in different processes, respiration, excretion, locomotion, etc. and only 10% moves to next level. 10% law of energy flow. Nutrients, materials in an ecosystem move in a cyclic manner. The cycling of nutrients takes place between the biotic and abiotic components, hence known as biogeochemical cycles. Bio is equal to living, geo equal to earth, and chemical equal to nutrients. Every ecosystem functions to produce and sustain some primary production, plant biomass, and secondary production, animal biomass. Every ecosystem regulates and maintains itself and resists any stresses or disturbances up to a certain limit. This self-regulation or control system is known as cybernetic system. If energy in any form cannot be created or destroyed by only transformed, it means that it goes around in cycles, and in fact it is energy that powers some very important cycles that drive life. These include the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. The water cycle. Water may not be alive, but it is moving all the time. It moves in oceans, in currents and tides, but in addition, it moves because of the sun. The sun acts as a furnace which heats up the earth. This heat energy from the sun causes water to be pulled into the atmosphere by evaporation. In the atmosphere, water as water vapor forms clouds and eventually returns to the land or ocean as rain or snow. On land, the water goes into the soil and underlying rocks as groundwater or flows directly into streams, rivers or lakes. The carbon cycle. All living things need carbon and are made from it in one form or the other. Fossil fuels like coal and crude oil are the concentrated remains of the carbon from dead plants and animals that have formed over millions of years. The burning of large amounts of fossil fuels and the clearing of large forested areas has resulted in an increase of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. If a diagram were drawn showing the different processes that move carbon from one form to the other, its main processes would be photosynthesis, respiration, decomposition, natural weathering of rocks, and the combustion of fossil fuels. Photosynthesis. Carbon exists in the atmosphere as a compound carbon dioxide. It first enters the ecological food web, the connected network of producers and consumers, when photosynthetic organisms such as plants and certain algae absorb carbon dioxide through tiny pores in their leaves. The plants then fix or capture the carbon dioxide and are able to convert it into simple sugars like glucose through the biochemical process known as photosynthesis. Plants store and use this sugar to grow and to reproduce. Thus, by their very nature as makers of their own food, plants remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When plants are eaten by animals, their carbon is passed on to those animals. Since animals cannot make their own food, they must get their carbon either directly by eating plants or indirectly by eating animals that have eaten plants. Respiration. Respiration is the next step in the cycle, and unlike photosynthesis, it occurs in plants, animals and even decomposer. Although we usually think only of breathing oxygen when we hear the word respiration, it has a broader meaning that involves oxygen. To a biologist, respiration is a process in which oxygen is used, also break down, remove and recycle what might be called nature's garbage. Weathering of rocks, Not all carbon atoms are always moving somewhere in the carbon cycle. Often many become trapped in lime rock, a type of stone formed on the ocean floor by the shells of marine plankton. Sometimes after millions of years, the waters recede and the lime rock is eventually exposed to the elements. When lime rock is exposed to the natural process of weathering, it slowly releases the carbon atoms it contains and they become an active part of the carbon cycle once again. Human-caused increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In recent history, humans have added to the carbon cycle by burning fossil fuels. Ever since the rapid growth of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, when people first harnessed steam to power their engines, human beings have been burning carbon-containing fuels like coal and oil called fossil fuels for artificial power. This constant burning produces massive amounts of carbon dioxide which are released into Earth's atmosphere. Biodiversity is the part of nature which includes the difference in genes among the individuals of a species, the variety and richness of all the plant and animal species at different scales in space, locally in a region, in the country and the world, and various types of ecosystem, both terrestrial and aquatic within a defined area. Types of biodiversity. Genetic diversity. Each member of any animal or plant species differs widely from other individuals in its genetic makeup because of the large number of combinations possible in the genes that give every individual specific characteristic. Thus, for example, each human being is very different from all others. This genetic variability is essential for a healthy breeding population of a species. If the number of breeding individuals is reduced, the dissimilarity of genetic makeup is reduced and inbreeding occurs. Eventually, this can lead to the extinction of the species. The diversity in wild species forms the gene pool from which our crops and domestic animals have been developed over thousands of years. Today, the variety of nature's bounty is being further harnessed by using wild relatives of crop plants to create new varieties of more productive crops and to breed better domestic animals. Modern biotechnology manipulates genes for developing better types of medicines and a variety of industrial products. Species diversity. The number of species of plants and animals that are present in a region constitute its species diversity. This diversity is seen both in natural ecosystem and in agricultural ecosystem. Some areas are richer in species than others. Natural, undisturbed tropical forests have much greater species richness than plantation. Natural forest ecosystem provides a large number of non-wood products that local people depend on, such as fruit, fuel, wood, fodder, fiber, gum, resin, and medicine. Timber plantation do not provide the large variety of goods that are essential for local consumption. In the long term, the economic sustainable returns from non-wood forest products is said to be greater than the returns from felling a forest for its timber. Thus, the value of a natural forest with all its species richness is much greater than a plantation. Ecosystem diversity. There are a large variety of different ecosystems on Earth which have their own complement of distinctive interlinked species based on the differences in the habitat. Ecosystem diversity can be described for a specific geographical region or a political entity such as a country, a state, or a taluka. Distinctive ecosystems include landscapes such as forests, grasslands, deserts, mountains, etc., as well as aquatic ecosystems such as rivers, lakes, and the sea. Each region also has man-modified areas such as farmland or grazing pastures. An ecosystem is referred to as natural when it is relatively undisturbed by human activities or modified when it is changed to other types of uses such as farmland or urban areas. Ecosystems are most natural in wilderness areas. If natural ecosystems are overused or misused, their productivity eventually decreases and they are then said to be degraded. India is exceptionally rich in ecosystem diversity. The following video will help us understand the concept of invasive species. Importance of forests. Forests are the only source of timbers, wood fuel, bamboos, and a rich source of a variety of valuable products. They guard against erosion of land, damage of watersheds, floods, and segmentation. They provide a shelter to the wildlife. Above all, forests also provide facility of the grazing of livestock and produce a large number of products of commercial as well as industrial importance. Types of forests: moist tropical forests, dry tropical forests, mountain subtropical forests, mountain temperate forests, subalpine forests, alpine scrub forests. Deforestation. Forests in developing countries is going to be reduced at an alarming rate. This process of deforestation is a serious threat to economy, quality of life, and future of the environment in our country. The important causes of deforestation are rapid explosion of human and livestock population, expansion of agricultural croplands for farming and enhanced grazing by cattle, increased demand for fuel, wood, timber, wooden crates, paper, newsprints, paperboard, medicine, etc. Wildlife conservation measures. For the preservation of species, wildlife management staff should have a correct idea about the exact habitat which the species under consideration needs. Natural habitat of wild animals should be carefully protected. Shooting and hunting of endangered species should be totally banned. Habitats of wildlife should be improved by constructing water holes, salt licks, and by raising plantation of better and nourishing fodder, grasses, and trees. Reason for depletion of wildlife. Destruction of wild plants of forests for timber, charcoal, and firewood often deprives wild animals their most palatable food and affects their survival. Absence of covers or shelter to wild animals, noise pollution by different transport media, and polluting rivers' water have adversely affected wild animals. Hunting methods of all kinds and for any purpose, that is food, recreation, fur, plumage, tusk, horn, etc., have caused destruction of wildlife. Link between biodiversity and climate change. Climate change is affecting species already threatened by multiple threats across the globe. Habitat fragmentation due to colonization, logging, agriculture and mining, etc. are all contributing to further destruction of terrestrial habitats. Individual species may not be able to adapt. Species most threatened by climate change have small ranges, low population densities, restricted habitat requirements and patchy distribution. Ecosystem will generally shift northward or upward in altitude, but in some cases they will run out of space as 10 C change in temperature correspond to a 100 km change in latitude. Hence, average shift in habitat condition by the year 2100 will be on the order of 140 to 580 km. Coral reef mortality may increase and erosion may be accelerated. Increased level of carbon dioxide adversely impact the coral building process. Calcification. Sea level may rise, engulfing low-lying areas, causing disappearance of many islands and extinctions of endemic island species. Invasive species may be added by climate change. Exotic species can outcompete native wildlife for space, food, water and other resources and may also prey on native wildlife. Droughts and wildfires may increase. An increased risk of wildfires due to warming and drying out of vegetation is likely. Sustained climate change may change the competitive balance among species and might lead to forest destruction. Population. The group reviewed briefly the essential facts of the present situation regarding world population, environment and development. World population now stands at around 4.9 billion and will rise to about 6.1 billion by the year 2000. Of this population, around 80% will be in the developing countries, as will 20 of the 25 cities with over 10 million inhabitants. It would be a grave error to think that because the rate of increase in population growth rates has peaked, the problems are solved. World population in aggregate continues to increase by 80 million per year, and this annual addition will rise to 90 million in the year 2000. On current projections, world population may stabilize around the year 2100 at a global level of 10.2 billion. Effective action could advance this date by 20 years, stabilizing at 2.2 billion less than the current projection. However, if world population stabilizes 20 years later, then it would be greater by 2.8 billion. Effective action can therefore influence the level at which global population stabilizes by around 5 billion people. At present, family planning programs are being implemented with varying degrees of effectiveness in 87 developing countries. 27 developing countries are not yet implemented such programs, around half of these in Africa, where higher rates of population growth continue. International support is vital, but resources are at present inadequate and indeed some international programs are under attack. Environment. Very substantial changes are taking place in the global environment, such as desertification, rapid destruction of tropical forests, air and water pollution, the growth of urban slums, the destruction of forests in some developed countries, together with problems of global impact in regard to the atmosphere and oceans. Although actions at the national level is essential, these problems cannot be dealt with through national action alone. Effective international cooperation is a prerequisite for human survival. Current patterns of exploitation, for example, of tropical forests and of fragile ecological regions are not only damaging but inefficient. The wider repercussions of such damage may be irreversible. For example, the destruction of forest vegetation is essential to water and soil conservation and to the fragile balance of ecological system. Prudent management would allow utilization, development and conservation. Development. The vital linkages between population, environment and development have been tragically demonstrated in contributing to the disaster in Africa. The effects of a rapidly increasing Population on a fragile environment coupled with adverse climatic conditions and human conflict have combined to destroy development prospect, leading to social collapse and migration. This disaster, long anticipated, might have been mitigated by early national and international action. But the surge of international concern and support came late. To avoid a repetition of such a disaster on a greater scale, far-sighted policies, sustained efforts and commitment to longer-term development are needed. Effective population and development policies carefully combined can lead to a good balance between economic and population growth. This, together with sound environmental policies, can make possible sustained human progress while preserving the environment. No sustained progress is possible without effective population and environmental policies. There is evidently an urgent need for increased international efforts to tackle the truly global problems of world population and the world environment. International cooperation must be increased, but it is in fact increasingly strained and in some cases under attack. Even in cases of obvious urgency and common interest, activities are being cut back as a result of reductions in international financial support. In this connection, the group pointed to the enormous waste of resources on armaments in developed and developing countries, resources vitally needed to start substantial new efforts to face environmental and development problems. It is a grave mistake to consider these problems only as long-term problems. They are urgent now. Although under the pressure of immediate economic difficulties, they have been pushed aside at the highest levels of policy for a number of years, substantial and urgent international action is now required. In this respect, the Interaction Council can play an important role in pressing for specific action and promotion and new international coalitions in its support. Recommendation to each country and countrymen. In the interest of present and future generation, it is essential that population, environment and development issues again become a central focus of international concern and action. Despite the urgency of current problems, these longer-term problems cannot be put aside. The developed and developing countries have an inseparable common interest in stabilizing world population at the lowest feasible level, in preserving and rehabilitating the world environment and in promoting equitable development so as to preserve peace. Population, environmental and development problems essentially require long-term commitment and effort to increase understanding, to motivate and organize participation and to achieve results. Attitudes to population are linked to national culture, philosophy, religion and policies in each country. It is a right of every country to formulate its own population policies based on respect for human life and concern for humanity. Also, in view of the seriousness and the persistence of present problems, each country should endeavor to reconcile religious and cultural consideration with actual needs and should enhance population policy as its priority. Environment, population and development issues must be dealt with at the local, national, regional and global levels in appropriate ways. The essence of human survival is the prudent use of natural resources and the environment together with their conservation. Overexploitation, besides leading to environmental degradation, is also economically inefficient. The desire to preserve the environment in many developing countries is not matched by the capacity to do so under the pressure for survival. International encouragement, support and resources are therefore essential, but they must respect local knowledge and attitudes. International assistance, both bilateral and multilateral, has played an important role which must be substantially increased. There is also a vital continuing role for non-governmental organizations, private corporations, universities and other organizations. Proposal for action. Developing countries. Developing countries should place increased emphasis on development at the local, rural level. A particular target should be the basic social unit of the family and the role of women in particular. Policies should specifically seek to make rural life more attractive by providing opportunities for employment, for personal development and recreation. Efforts must be made to attract urban dwellers back to rural areas and to remove the bias in favor of urban communities, which is reflected in food pricing policies, human settlement and investment strategies. Policies should increase the emphasis on education so as to change entrenched attitudes towards fertility, employment, and the role of women. For example, in this respect, universities in developing countries have a special contribution to make. Primary education, particularly for girls, is of special importance, as is the eradication of adult illiteracy, especially among women. Substantially increased efforts are also required for programs to improve health, particularly for primary health care, family planning, immunization of children, and the control of diarrheal and tropical diseases. National efforts in this direction require strong international support. Governments should establish guidelines and criteria to ensure proper consideration of population environmental aspects. In the design and implementation of development projects, conservation groups linked to education, female literacy, and family planning could be organized at the local level to promote participation and the acceptance of new ideas. Government should make more use in a systematic manner of the potential of non-governmental private sector and voluntary organization. There is a need for increased cooperation between developing countries, both to face the reality of problems which cross national boundaries and to improve policy through the exchange of experience about success and failures. Developed countries. Flows of international assistance have fallen far short of the needs of the developing countries, especially those of least developed countries. Developed countries must ultimately face the need to provide increased longer-term assistance essential to support the preservation and rehabilitation of the environment in developing countries, to help those who wish to moderate the growth of population and to accelerate development to meet the needs of a growing world population. Assistance must be tailored to meet the real needs and conditions of the developing countries. Developed countries should therefore review the effects of food aid on incentives to produce food in developing countries and also the effects of their economic and trade policies, particularly for agricultural products, on patterns of agricultural production. Developed creditor countries should agree to measures to reduce the debt burden on developing countries so as to release resources for sound development. The developed countries should recognize the important role of multilateral assistance complementary to bilateral assistance. They should therefore support those multilateral development institutions which make real contribution to solving the problems of population, environment, and development. A specific proposal was made that cooperation among European countries should be strengthened to prevent and reverse present trends in air, water and soil pollution, the destruction of natural ecosystem, deforestation and soil erosion, etc. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. As the human population continues to grow, the natural environment is put under ever-increasing pressure. Producers are those which mainly producing food themselves. There is a unidirectional flow of energy in an ecosystem. It flows from sun and then, after being captured by primary producer, flows through the food chain or food web. The plants fix or capture the carbon dioxide and are able to convert it into simple sugars like glucose through the biochemical process known as photosynthesis. Respiration is a process in which oxygen is used, also break down, remove and recycle what might be called nature's garbage. Biodiversity is a part of nature which includes the difference in genes among the individuals of a species. Numbers of species of plants and animals that are present in a region constitute its species diversity. Forests in developing countries is going to be reduced at an alarming rate. This process is called deforestation. Destruction of wild plants of forests for timber, charcoal and firewood often deprives wild animals their most palatable food, affects their survival. Climate change is affecting species already threatened by multiple threats across the globe.